So I thought we have many, I assume we have many different kinds of students here today. We have producing students, we have some acting students, some filmmaking students, etc. So I thought, people who are just thinking about starting their careers might be very interested to know how you started your career. So where did you first get into acting? Was that something that you thought about as a child? Did you study acting? How did you come to this wonderful field?
I was 3 years old when I was in school and doing a nursery rhyme. I don't know if you all are familiar with it or not. It was called Hey Diddle Diddle, the Cat and the Fiddle.
I think we got that.
The cow jumped over the moon. So I was playing the cow, and there was another 3-year-old child who was playing the moon. And instead of jumping over the moon, I jumped right on top of her. She got up and gave me a tight slap, and I slapped her, and that was my entry to stage when it was determined that, all right, this is something that I will do. But frankly, because my mother was a very respected stage actress, during my vacations, she would take me along on her tours. And so Prithviraj Kapur, who was a very respected actor at that time and also a theatre director, had made costumes for me so that in group sequences, I would just go up on stage. So I really grew up with the smell of grease paint in my nostrils. And then from my mother, I imbibed a love for acting just by a process of osmosis. In school, it was a girls' school, so I was always playing boys' roles for some reason. I wanted to play Snow White, but unfortunately I couldn't, and things like that. I had to play the villain instead. But it was when I was in college that I started a theatre group with a colleague of mine, and we won every single award. At that point, I thought that this is what I really like to do, and joined the Film Institute of India, which is a very reputable institute. And the training that I got there for 2 years, I think, is responsible for the actor that I have become. So I'm very grateful to my professor, Roshan Taneja. I'm also, because of that experience, a great believer in training, because I really think there is nothing quite like training. And I would really advocate it to all students who want to join films in whatever department, that it would be a wise thing to go through training.
So that was an acting course within a larger film school. There were many different departments, and you studied acting.
That's right.
And did you have a mutual attraction to both stage work and screen? Or how did you then segue into your professional career?
I was very lucky. I was at the right place at the right time. And with the very first film that I did, it was almost like a dream, because I passed out from the institute with a gold medal for acting. And literally the next day, I was actually shooting for a professional film. And then after that, I immediately got a lot of work in the industry. That was also because at that particular time, the film industry was really looking at graduates from the Film Institute. And so they were keen to have me. And after that, for a long time, my first film was in 1974, and it was not really till 1980 that I did my first professional play. And I still continue to do theatre and doing both. But I think of myself as a cinema actor. But I think for an actor, if you can play in both mediums, it's the ideal.
Do you feel like there's a difference in the way you approach your craft when you're on stage versus a film role?
That's a question I'm asked quite often. Actually, what does acting demand of you? Acting demands of you that you inhabit the world of the character that you are playing. And there are different processes by which you do it, sometimes inside out, sometimes outside in. So the process of finding the character remains the same, except that when you put it to work, then completely different skills are required, because in film, as we know, you can do retake after retake, and in theatre you have to do a performance the full day. Also in theatre you tend to get the opportunity to do 4 weeks of rehearsal, which you don't get in film. But the process of finding a character is the same. Because I was trained in the Stanislavski's method, School of Acting, I was told that an actor should be able to prefix the words "if I were" to any character and be able to play it. So if I were a queen, a slum dweller, a slut, ordinary housewife, anything, I should be able to put. The actor should have the facility to be able to enter and inhabit the world of that part. And what you can do is really, I think what I learned in the Film Institute is that actors have very fancy notions about what acting is. They think acting is about being theatrical, about performing in a particular way, about being inspired by actors whom you have admired, and then doing a part thinking, how would that person who I admire so much do this part? That, I was told, was completely to be cancelled, because the truth has to be found from within yourself. I also learned that the actor is her own instrument. For instance, if you play the guitar, how well you play it would depend on the dexterity of your fingers, but also how finely tuned the guitar is. So it's dependent on two factors, right? But for an actor, it is her mind, her body, her brain, her heart that she's bringing to it. So an actor is her own instrument. And what acting lies in is discovering the truth of a particular situation and a facility to arrive at it.
Do you have a preference? If stage or screen? I mean, I'm sure that you feel they both have their advantages and joy from the experience or the pain of the experience. I'm just curious.
I think there's nothing quite like performing in front of a live audience and the tension of that and the immediate response. And what I find very interesting is that the minute you get smug and the minute you know that I know the audience is going to laugh there, I know the audience is going to, believe you me, that's the day the audience is not going to laugh over there, because you need an organic way of being able to go to the same place without imitating what you've done in the past. So the challenge of appearing in front of a live audience is wonderful, but finally when I look at myself in terms of craft, I think I'm basically a cinema actor. And also what is required is the lensing is so important, because if you have such a tight close-up, there's no way you can lie. You can't pretend. On stage, maybe you can pretend by using your voice or your body or whatever. In film, you can't do it. And then how do you manage to pick up a scene that was shot in fragments? So it's possible that I do a pretty dramatic scene and leave it and then pick it up 6 months later. That's what used to happen in Hindi films. How do you keep that in you is a very big challenge. So I don't think that I can say one over the other, but I think that if an actor has a choice, do both.
And is the Stanislavski method, is it pretty widely taught through India? Because I'm obviously coming from an American perspective, so I know nothing. I've never, but I'm interested that, here we are in New York. home of the method and the actor's studio. Is Stanislavski, is it taught throughout? Is it fairly widespread?
In the acting schools. Mm-hmm. In the acting schools, yeah. More than anything, it is the method, and I've benefited very greatly from the method. The fact that the method teaches you to use emotional memory to be able to bring to the present situation that emotion. For instance, let me tell you that also what that requires is constant observation on the part of the actor. Constant observation. It becomes an almost automatic response. I have found myself in extraordinary situations, watching myself observing something. For instance, I saw somebody who I knew quite closely. I saw her dead body. And she was lying in a cubicle in a hospital. And I was looking at her from here. And while I was feeling the intensity of her loss, Neal, I was also observing that her mouth had dropped. And so I caught myself actually saying, when I've played dead, I haven't dropped my mouth like that. So I am dropping my mouth while I'm looking at her, and the emotion of feeling her loss is there. So it's a simultaneous thing that happens. That's why I think actors are neurotic. Because what acting demands of you, particularly in the method, is that at the click of a button, you should be able to reproduce any emotion that is required in the scene, whether it's deep sorrow, whether it's gaiety, whether it's joy, which is the opposite of what civilized society asks of you. Civilized society says you must keep your emotions under control. Acting demands of you that you must keep your emotions right at your throat, ready to burst out at the click of a button. So if in such high volatility you are going to keep your emotions, obviously you're going to be neurotic, and I'm so, my daughter will tell you that I am.
And I find that fascinating, and I think, I'm sure there are some acting students here, but I think this is so valuable to hear, if you're a director or a producer, to have some insight into an actor's craft, their perspective, etc. Because I find what you're saying to be very inspiring and insightful. Because it's rare that we have an opportunity to, speak with actors about their craft. We get to see it all the time, but we don't necessarily, get that kind of insight that you're bringing to us right here, right now. So I appreciate all of that. And I think it's important for all the different disciplines, even if you're a cinematographer or whatever, to have an understanding of what that person is doing, what they're going through, some insight into their process. It's only going to enhance your craft, whatever that craft may be. So you came up through Bollywood, and I'm curious, was there an attraction to international film for you from the beginning? Did you aspire to, kind of move beyond Bollywood, or did you even think about it? I'm just very curious about the perspective from a kind of Bollywood actor's point of view in terms of the big world of international film, which must have influenced you as a child. I have to assume, that you were exposed to a lot of different kinds of films.
Before I answer that, may I just add to what you said about the cinematography?
Absolutely.
Okay? All right. Because filmmaking is the most collaborative of all art forms. As an actor, I am deeply aware that most of the time the actor gets away with the accolades because it's the actor who faces the camera. But the fact is, the actor herself is aware that there's a whole host of technicians who are working very hard to enhance her strength and to cover up her weaknesses. Now, when it comes to cinematographer, it's really interesting because there are some cinematographers who are so keen on their frame that never mind if the actor has poured her heart out, if she hasn't hit that mark, they will say cut and deprive the audience of a really truthful moment. A very sensitive cinematographer will go along and maybe make a slight adjustment and then say, no, that's more important than my frame. So it is important. For me as an actor, it's very important for me to know that as important as it is for me to get the emotion, it is also for the cinematographer to get me in the frame and the lighting that he has wanted. Yes, so that's why when I say it's such a collaborative medium, that unless you also have awareness of all the other people that you're working with, how important sound is, for instance.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and how it all works together. I was just telling Namrata, and she said you must share it here, that I recently on the plane saw a film called King Richard. It's about this William, what is his name?
Will
Serena
Smith.
Williams.
Serena Williams.
Will Smith of the slap frame. And there's, how many of you have seen it? Okay, a few have seen it. Okay, so there's one sequence in it, right at the end, when Serena's poised to challenge the world #1 when she's only 14 years old. And you almost know what the result of that is going to be. But it has been cut so well, edited so sharply, that the editor has managed to keep you on your toes through that thing when you already know that it's a given what's going to happen. Okay, so that to me is an editor's moment. After that, she loses, and then she has a moment with her parents, and then she comes out, and you see her only in a long shot in a field which is completely bare. The director doesn't go close to her face, and you say, my God, that's the director's moment, because the director has created this by opening up the space. After that, she opens the door, and there are hundreds of people cheering her on, and suddenly her spirits get raised, which is the writer. So in one sequence, of course, so the actor is there throughout, but look at how the actor is also being helped by all these people. So it's so collaborative that it's really important for each department to know about the other department, and that is what NYFA does, and I think that's so very precious.
And I fully appreciate that, and I think all the producing students here have heard from me, the whole idea that it's because producers, we oversee the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So it's important not just that we oversee everyone and the process, but that we have insight into what these people do, which is why our producing students get camera classes and lighting classes and writing classes and editing classes, just to give some insight. But I think, to your point, what's really important is something that we also stress here, which is at the end of the day, we're all doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. We're all storytellers. Mm-hmm. And you can never lose sight of, this is why I'm here. So if you're a cinematographer, it's because you have chosen to participate in telling this story. It's not your story, not necessarily the director or the actors. It is this collaborative effort, but it's all building to telling the story. And that probably is why that more sensitive cinematographer will slightly adjust, because it's the story, which is the paramount piece here.
But also for the producer, you see, what happens is quite often the relationship between a producer and a director becomes contentious rather than complementary. And that happens because the producer is so concerned about the budget. And filmmaking is something where, of course, you have to stick within a budget. but there are things that might go out of budget. And I think the producer really has to be ready for a certain amount, because uh, it's not a surgical procedure, it's a creative process. And in that creative process, to grudge the director something that is not written uh, into the budget is something that I would really appeal that that's not the way to go about it. And of course, it's not for the director to squander away all the funds either. But what I am saying is leave room for an improvisational quality that any creative process will almost always have.
Yeah, I don't disagree for a moment, and I think, it's something that I think these producing students we haven't gotten to that part of the course yet.
Okay.
But no, but my point is that what we do is we use both sides of our brains. So we have to, pay attention to the business aspect of what's going on as at the same time as paying, equal attention to the creative side. And the bottom line remains the same, which is that we're telling the story, and the way that the best way to do that. So you're not going to get an argument. I'm not one of those people, but there are, plenty of producers who kind of stay more focused on the financial aspect of what they're doing. But that's not really what we're all about here at the New York. I mean, it's important. I'm not, like you. It's like no one's squandering anything here. But you can never lose sight of the fact that we're here. We're telling a story, and we're collaborating with all these people and allowing them to do the work that they need to do in order to tell the story in the best possible way. So now back to the Bollywood versus international. I'm curious because I did not grow up in Mumbai. You were literally, as we say in this, born in a trunk. You come from that kind of stage, show business kind of background. But you did it in the subcontinent. You did it in Mumbai. I'm curious what that was like, the kind of dialectic of, you're in the middle of the industry. I mean, your mother was a noted actress, but yet you must have had an eye on Hollywood movies and movie stars. And how did that all work or shake down? Or maybe it didn't exist at all. I'm just very curious.
At the Film Institute, I was introduced to international cinema, to European cinema, to Japanese cinema, to things that just would not have been available to me had I not gone to the Film Institute at that time. So I was a great fan of Bergman and people like that, Kurosawa, Bergman, Fellini. Hollywood was something that I had not even considered. I hadn't even thought of it. But one day, and we used to be so busy, Neal, at that time we were doing, because India makes the largest number of movies in the world. We make twice the number of films that Hollywood does.
You do, but I'm just going to say one word for you, which is Nollywood. The Nigerian
so.
film, they make more than Bollywood, which is
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
They turn them out. Yeah, they're like 2 weeks. They're doing it. But no, it's true that people aren't aware that, we all hear Hollywood, but it's true that the number of films that Bollywood puts out, makes the American film industry a dwarf. So we'll stay with that.
Okay, all right. So at one time, we were doing so many movies at one time that finally they decided that this was going really bad, and they said, okay, actors are not going to be allowed to do more than 12 films at one time. Can you imagine doing 12 films at the same time? So we were so busy constantly doing 2 shoots a day. So I used to work from 7 a.m. to 2 on one film.
Wow.
And then take a car to the other studio and then work from 2 to 10. in that scenario, I couldn't even think of leaving all this. I was right in the midst of all that. And one day I just got a call from a producer called Robin Dalton. And she said, I'm making this film called Madame Suzatska with Shirley MacLaine. And John Schlesinger. Now, of course, John Schlesinger's work I had seen. And so I said, well, how did you think of me? And she said, well, Ruth Chabwala mentioned you. It was very interesting because it's based on a novel by Bernice Rubens, in which the mother played by me, is actually a Jewish mother. But Ruth Chabwala, because she was writing the screenplay and she was working with John Schlesinger, she said, why not make her into an Indian mother? And John went along, and when I asked him why he did that, he said, well, Indians are so much of a part of the British fabric that they need some visibility. So it was as early as 89 that, there was talk about Asian actors having more visibility. And so I went, and I mean, it was quite magical, the whole thing. But it was not Hollywood in that sense, even though it was Shirley MacLaine and all that. But when I started doing a lot of Hollywood films, I realized that, for instance, I did a film with Patrick Swayze called City of Joy, and the director of that was the director of Mission. What is his name?
Roland Joffe.
Roland Joffe. So what happened is, I think when the two of us started working together, we learned from each other. We learned that there is organization, there are systems, there are things in place, the details are worked out in the script. Every department knows exactly what they have. In Indian movies at that time, it was completely ad hoc. Nobody knew anything. It just happened on the day. But also what happened is, in Hollywood, if the system fails, everything fails. Nobody has the wherewithal to do anything if the system fails. In India, you make do with so little that you're constantly on the go to get it right, never mind what happens, because your resources are that much less. So I remember it was the last day of shooting in Calcutta, and we were supposed to do a huge rain sequence for which they had brought a rain machine from Los Angeles. And this was the last day of shooting, and the next day Patrick Swayze was supposed to fly back to LA. And what do you think? The rain machines failed. So of course there was panic on the set, and they said, oh my God, we've had the rain machines for so long. And I mean, accusations were flying left and right and all that. There were two young boys sitting on somewhere in the set, and they said, what's this fuss about? So they said that, it's the rain machine has failed. So they said, so what's the big deal? So they said, what do you mean? Give us hose pipes and we'll create the rain. And the rain that is in the movie is not from rain machines, but from the hose pipes, which were actually manually handled by these boys. So we learn from them and they learn from us. So I think it's a very happy situation.
So, do you enjoy doing the quote unquote international films? Is it kind of?
Oh yes, I've just finished the first season of Steven Spielberg's Halo, and in fact, in October, I'm going back for the second season, and I have enjoyed it vastly. Not just because everything is so detailed and it's a different system of working, but it's just for an actor to be anywhere, Timbuktu maybe, if it's a role that you like and you want to do. And for me, what was important about Halo was that, Asian actors have been saying for the last 20 years or so that we need visibility and we need colorblind casting. Why should we be cast because we are an Indian? I mean, so what? Any role can be given to an Indian, right? Halo was a really mainstream commercial film that just did colorblind casting. So although I play Margaret Parangonsky, Admiral Parangonsky in it, there is no attempt to locate me within that. I was not made to wear blonde hair or speak in a particular accent or something. And there were Koreans there were English people, there were Canadians, there were all kinds of people. And that I thought was very, very liberating. So I think that's the new way things will finally go in a world that we are constantly saying needs to be much more inclusive.
How do you feel the Indian film industry? Does this exist at all? This kind of new consciousness, or call it, this Me Too? Do you feel any of this kind of need for inclusivity, diversity, etc. in Bollywood?
It's not by design. It's completely coincidental, but it does, and I'll tell you why. You see, India is such a vast country and so multicultural that the film producer wants to cater to the lowest common denominator, because obviously wants everybody to come and watch the film. So you make a film in which you try to include all the states so that everybody is left happy. So I wouldn't say that it comes out of a great consciousness. It only makes very good sense money-wise. But of course, the younger people are becoming far more conscious. Because see, for instance, we have an area called the Northeast in India, which is completely neglected in our conversation, in anything. The younger filmmakers have now started consciously including the Northeast so that people come to know that these are also people in India. Also, there are some very sensitive directors who are taking people with physical handicaps, mental problems, including them in their films. So it's a healthy trend what's happening.
So that's a nice segue to a movie that you made that I think was very significant. And I certainly, remember, it was certainly significant for me to see Fire. So if people are not aware, Fire was made by
Deepa Mehta,
a Canadian director.
That's right.
With great music by A.R. Rahman as well. But that was a very significant movie for a number of reasons. But maybe I'd rather have you explain the significance of Fire than me.
See, Fire was made 24 years ago, and it was a story about two sisters-in-law who were neglected by their husbands and get into a relationship with each other. And this is middle-class Delhi. It was a subject that had never even been discussed. Forget about making a movie about it, because we have a tendency to hide things under the carpet if you don't want to talk about it. In fact, when the film was offered to me, I was confused about whether I should do it or not, because I knew that it would bring in a lot of controversy. And contrary to what people think, I don't think controversy is good, because what controversy does is add so much expectation baggage on whatever the creative art is. But obviously, if there's something that you feel needs to be said, it needs to be said. And then I figured that, obviously, there would be some people who would be very outraged. There would be some people who would be very angry and outraged, some who will be very deeply moved, and some who will question. And I think that's all that art can do. Art can create a climate of sensitivity in which it is possible for change to occur. And all you can do is start the process of questioning. So when Fire was released, it really received a very warm response. We were quite surprised by the response. But 3 weeks later, there was a political party that thought that they could take mileage out of the film, and then they started tearing the posters, and they, did terrible things with the theatre seats, etc., etc. And the film had to be pulled off the theatre. what was very good is it was re-referred to the censor board, and the censor board, the Board of Film Certification, said no, you can still show the movie. So now I've seen that it has become a cult film. I mean, there's no university anywhere in the world where I've not talked about it, and where it hasn't become almost the talking point, the cult film for same-sex relationship. So for me, the experience was challenging, but I was so convinced that the director would handle it so sensitively that I went ahead and did it. I also thought the space that my character was demanding for herself was something that was required, particularly in a country that is still very patriarchal in nature.
Do you think that it was, in terms of the way Indian society has progressed, was that kind of, and again, I'm just curious, was that like a blip on the radar? Was that like an unusual thing that just kind of happened and then people just went back to their usual ways? Or,
No,
do you think it foretold a kind of new era?
I think it foretold a new era. What did happen, of course, is some people try to sensationalize it and try to make cheap films on it, and they tanked, thank God. But now the whole subject of homosexuality is much more open. Earlier, it was always that they were poked fun at or laughed at, but now I think a certain sensitivity is coming in, and the younger people are becoming quite vocal about it. So I think that, and even in real life, you're seeing police officers marrying each other. You know, you're seeing whom you call the common man actually doing that. There was a very important section 377 which criminalized homosexuality, which has now been removed. So it's going in the right way.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, if people you characterize the project and the way it came about, but it really was very significant for the Indian society, and I think for the world at large. I mean, just seeing it. I think I was living in London at the time, but it really it's I think a great example of the power of cinema. That cinema does have and television. Media does have the capacity to, dare I say it, change the world, and I think that was an interesting example of that. But then you've now come back to work with Shekhar Kapur, who you did his very first film, Masoom. And we saw the trailer for What's Love Got to Do With It, starring Lily James and
Emma Thompson.
The great Emma Thompson. And if people don't know Shekhar Kapur, it's worth checking out his work. His probably best known English language film is Elizabeth, that starred Cate Blanchett as the first Queen Elizabeth.
And got nominations, I think 9 nominations for the
It's a really wonderful film. What was it like to, he's an interesting character because he also straddles both worlds of Bollywood and international films. What was it like to go back and work with him?
It was wonderful. Shekhar and I have been friends for a long time, but then we sort of drifted apart because he was living somewhere else, I was living somewhere else. And then he offered me the script. And when we decided to do it, it was under great pressure because it was the height of COVID. And we were shooting in London. And when I went from my home, people said, you'll be back in 3 days. And so the very strict COVID rules, etc. But we did the film in a record 40 days. Shekhar is a director who really loves his actors. He loves his actors and is able to inspire them confidence to do things that they wouldn't normally even do. Because you know that if you're going off the tangent, he would be able to draw you back over there. But you don't have to, because actors can also sometimes, if they don't trust the director too much, then they know certain things work on camera. For instance, if I'm in a 75 lens and I look up in a particular way, I might not be feeling anything from inside. But with that eye and with that light, it would look perfect, right? So he is a person who will get you to be completely truthful to that character. And he listens to actors. He is not bossy at all. I think he has the best relationship that you can have with his actors. He's gentle with them, but he manages to get what he wants.
We will take some questions from the audience, people here, but you also have a life outside of film and theater and acting. Could you share a little bit of your, tell us about some of your humanitarian work that you do?
You see, both my parents used to believe that art should be used as an instrument for social change. My father was a writer and a poet. He was also a member of the Communist Party. And so till the age of 9, I lived in a room which was just 200 square feet, which was part of a bigger house, where 8 families lived together, and they had one common toilet and one common bathroom. So from that, in spite of the fact that there was no money at all, there was this great feeling, a great respect for what is called in the composite culture of India. Today, I think we're all getting divided into very narrow sects, religion being the most important of them, nationality. You are so and so, how dare you cross your border to come to mine? There's a refugee problem. There's all kinds of things that are happening in the world. And I think compassion and humanity is getting lost. I think art is a very strong instrument that can be used by, like you said, telling stories that move people to compassion. And there was one such film that I saw. You see, in Mumbai city, almost 70% of the city lives in the slums. And it's cheek by jowl. So there's a high-rise building here and there is a slum here because the slum services the city. People say the slums are an eyesore, they should be removed. So the question we asked was, are you talking about a cosmetic change, or are you talking about changing the lives of the people that make the city? Because if 70% of the people decided one day to go on strike, Bombay would come to a grinding halt. But I didn't know what the answer to that was. I saw a film by Anand Patwardhan. It was a documentary called Bombay, Our City. And it was when I saw that film that I felt, oh my God. But just before that, what had happened is I was playing a migrant in a film called Par, who comes away with her husband when she's 4 months pregnant to come to the city in search of work. Now, as an actor, what I do is I try and find a character who's close to the part that I'm playing, so that I can sort of see how she's sitting, how she's eating, etc., etc. We were living in this fancy guest house at that time, and there was a sweeper girl there, and I made friends with her. And so I was watching her as a model. Now, a couple of days into the shooting, she said, will you please come to my house and have a cup of tea? So I said, yes, of course. And when I went there, I was absolutely shocked by the poverty that I saw, because it was a tiny little room that had no light, that had no air. 8 people were living there in such dire circumstances, I can't tell you. And I was amazed that in spite of these dire straits that she lives in, she has the generosity to call herself my friend. And I was so taken up by that I felt that, if I went back to my city without doing anything for this woman whom I was using to maybe get national award, which I did actually in that film, then it would be a travesty of the trust that she had placed in me while we were becoming friends. And just as I was sort of completely sensitized by that, I came to Bombay and then I saw Anand Patwardhan's Bombay Our City. And that's how I got involved with the slums. And so we have made with Nivara Haq, the organization that I was working with, 50,000 homes for free for the slum dwellers in Bombay. Along with that, my father settled in a small little village called Mijwa, which was the land of his birth in UP Azamgarh. And he came back to see that it was a village frozen in time. So he set up an NGO there that focuses on women and the girl child, on education, giving them employment opportunities, etc. And so it intersects very beautifully with the work that I do, because the only way you can stem slums from springing up is if you guarantee employment in the village in the first place, so that people do not have to come to the city in search of work. And that's what's happening with refugees, right? Refugees, of course, come because of war and ravages of all that thing, but they're coming in search of a better life. So many of us are migrants. We're all coming to America. We are people who've got a lot of money and we are coming, so it's fine. But if a poor person comes and wants to make, you want to grudge that poor person, that's not just, that's not fair.
Right. Well, it's very much, the story of the city, that we do welcome immigrants, and that we are, a melting pot. The rest of the country, it's another story. But
I have a slight problem with the melting pot.
Go ahead.
Because the melting pot suggests that people must submerge individual identities into a larger identity. What a mosaic says is you retain your identity while contributing to a larger whole. So the melting pot for cultures that are so sharply defined by religion and other things, that is a slight problem. So I think if we talk about a mosaic, because we're struggling with it in India, right? And so it's exactly the same kind of thing, because Mumbai is a city that attracts people from the hinterlands, from everywhere. And so what we're insisting on is, don't call it a melting pot, say that it's a mosaic.
Okay, point taken. I stand corrected. Who has a question for Shaban? We have a few moments.
Just one second. Can you just talk about art and how you got involved with the women's rights movement?
There was a film called Earth that I did, which means meaning. And it was a very simple kind of film, actually. It was about a wife whose husband has an extramarital affair, and he leaves her. And she's shattered by it because she hasn't known a life separate from him. And she begs him to come back, and he doesn't. And then she finally starts gathering herself together, and she goes on and gets a job. Now, this was in 1983. And one day the husband comes back because he's been thrown out by his girlfriend. And he says, I made a mistake. Will you take me back? So the wife turns around to him and says very calmly, if I had made the same mistake, would you have taken me back? And he's honest enough to say no. So she says no, and she walks out on him. Now, this was in 1983, and the distributors went mad. They said, it's a very good film, but you have to change the end, because Indian society and a man saying sorry to the wife, but anyway, we dug our heels and said, let's do this. And the film was a huge hit. It got me the national award. But what happened was, I started having hordes of women come into my house, not as fans to star, but in sisterhood, expecting me to resolve all their marital conflicts. And I was just an actor who'd done a job. But that made me realize that in the public's eye, there is so many times a confusion between the character and the actor. And that the actor has an opportunity because of visibility and because of accessibility to the powers that be, that it would be nice if we could use that for social issues.
a question. Right.
Hi.
Welcome to New York if you haven't been here before. I have like a three-part question. My first question is I want to clarify what you feel as far as the melting pot. Because New York is one melting pot, but then you have like Washington, D.C., where the melting pot there, it is a realm for individuality. There's Ethiopians, there's whatever, and nobody feels conformed to be Americanized. It is a melting pot because there's so many different cultures. So could you just explain, like, I didn't understand if you were saying that New York really isn't a melting pot or that you're not.
I was talking about the terminology. I was talking about the terminology because a melting pot suggests that you get into a larger culture. So if there is, for instance, an American culture, then you might be Indian, you might be African, you might be Chinese, but you fit into that American culture. What I am saying, what a mosaic does, is there are small pieces in which you retain your individual identity. So you retain your Chinese, you retain your Indianness, and yet you fit into the larger mosaic. That's what I was saying. So it was just terminology.
Oh, okay. So it sounds like it's still the same though. The melting pot is still the same. Everybody retains their individuality, but comes to a larger because we live here. Okay, anyway. The second part is, I want to clarify, have you transitioned over to American? I might have missed it. I apologize if I missed that. You have worked on American films?
Yes, I worked in America.
What do you see the difference as far as coming from your background with Bollywood and then transitioning into Hollywood? What is the major difference that you see as far as, because I know it might be a little bit restricted in India, what is the difference that you see between Bollywood and Hollywood?
Well, it's in the storytelling, basically. Because in India, we come from a rich traditional culture that uses song as a way of telling a story. So whether it is Parsi theatre from where it started, or the various fields of art that we do, we use song in it. So that part of Bollywood is what sets it apart. The systems now are more or less becoming the same. And I think the divisions are also lessening because a lot of technicians, particularly cinematographers, are being used from here, which I think is a very happy situation. So instead of saying that there is this kind of difference, if we can look at it as both of them benefiting each other, which I find happens.
Right. But what I'm asking is, as an actress in Bollywood, what is there, if there might not be, what is the difference that you see from how you may do acting in Bollywood versus it here in Hollywood? Because there has to be some difference.
Firstly, I have problems with the word Bollywood because Bollywood just suggests that all of Indian cinema, which is huge, is just a copy or an imitation of Hollywood, which it is not. There's very rich cinema there. But what has come to be called Bollywood is really the song and dance kind of mainstream cinema. Earlier, it used to happen that we didn't even have a script, we merely had a story. And there were these insane situations when I was working in a scene where we only knew the first 2 pages while the next 3 pages were being written in another studio by a writer who was also an actor. So it was just piecing together whatever happened. Now it's far more systematic, so the difference is becoming much less.
Who else has? Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So the first ever film of yours I saw in theatre was Makri.
Are you happy I don't look like her in real life?
Yeah. So where you played a witch, and for a long period of time, my parents used you as a tool. If you don't study, she'll come and get you. So I just wanted to ask, like, how was the director and actor conversation for that particular role with Vishal sir?
This is a film that you see in that AV where I'm playing the witch.
Mhm.
So obviously for me, the most important thing was to get the look Right. And we struggled with it a lot. We tried and do various things, but I mean, that is what I was completely concentrated on. And so then, uh, I wore stills, shoes with stills, and then I got these nails, and it was really about the appearance, uh, much more than the inside of the witch. But it was interesting to do.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paris.
So, I wanted to ask you about you mentioned a very favorable relationship with the director, who, in your words, was very gentle in how they treated their actors, but still had the necessary tactics to get the performance that they needed out of it. Now, I haven't been through the director program here, but I have been at a different film school, and with Nimrod, I've been through some of the directing for producer courses in our program. And I've also been through a directing program at a theater school in New York City. And I noticed like a tremendously stark difference between how film directors are taught and how theater directors are taught. Namely that directing for film is usually taught through the lens of, like, no pun intended, the camera. And when you're learning theater directing, you are basically learning all of the skills that an actor would learn for stage, and how to kind of empathize with their process and their experience to kind of go on this journey together. So I was wondering, from your perspective, what advice might you have for a young film director to kind of get more of the richness from directing theater and incorporate that into their process, so that they're not just kind of thinking about directing their film from what shots do I need, how is this camera going to move, but also what kind of relationship and...
First, by having respect for the actor. There are some directors who really don't think much of actors because they feel it's all about me and my lens and how I'm going to cover and how I'm going to cut. And so the actor is just there to fill in the blanks for me. What I would say is the best thing is, you see, I think what the director's job is to inspire her entire crew so that everyone gives of their best. As a director, I would like to take the best actors for the job, I'd like to take the best cinematographer for the job, and then how do I bring all of them on the vision of what I have of this story? That is the challenge, right? And so I don't think that there is any fixed way in which you could do. But let's remember that producing a film is really working out human relationships, because that's what you're doing. Whether you're producing or whether you are directing, you're dealing with human beings. And you have to realize that actually actors are pretty fragile. You know, they are fragile. They put on all this act, but they are fragile. And so you have to therefore try, and different actors, like in beginning, in fact, with Shekhar Kapur, I used to get quite irritated when I did my first film, because I used to say, why is he so gentle with me? I'm a professional actor. If he doesn't like it, why doesn't he say, why is he treating me like dressed in China? I mean, I'm a professional actor, just say it didn't work and all that. And then my co-star pointed out to me, this is the way he works. So directors have different techniques with actors, and it's very important. I'll give you an example. I was working in a film called Anjuman by Muzaffar Ali, who is essentially a painter, and he was talking to me about a particular song in which he said, you have to see it visually, because first it's a square frame and you move into a horizontal one and then you go into a vertical one. So I said, this is a very bad director, and I scoffed at him, and I talked to my mother, who was a really traditional theatre actress, and she said, I'm sorry, you're very limited. So I said, why? Because she said, well, he's a painter and he is seeing the film visually. So you should be able to have the ability to grasp that and say how important that is, rather than only be concerned about is it telling the truth to me at this particular situation. But that was in his song. So that's why I'm saying, see, two different directors have completely different techniques of dealing with me. I cannot be shouted at. If you shout at me, you just cripple me. And there are some directors who get quite impatient. That's happening much less now, but it used to happen, and that I think just rattles an actor. It's really about trust, about trust. In theatre, what happens is ultimately they say that theatre is the actor's medium, because you can direct the actor as much as you want. But once I go on stage, I'll do what I have to do. Never mind, forget about your instruction. There's no way you can come and stop me. But in film, you can just cut me into two. You can decide to put me in silhouette. You can do anything you want. So it's the director's medium. So that's the only thing I think you have to consider when you're dealing with film and with theatre.
And of course, as producers, we get to oversee all of that.
Absolutely.
So there you go. I think we've run out of time, and I think that's a really good note to end on today. I want to thank you so much for coming here.
It was such a pleasure.
It was so insightful, and I found what you had to say very inspiring. So I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful for you coming to the New York Film Academy. Why don't we give Shabana Azmi a round of applause.